Emily's voice was nothing more than a whisper, drowned out by the laughter of those who mocked her. She was a high school girl, silenced by her own stutter, rejected by her peers, and tormented by a girl who made it her mission to humiliate her at every turn. 2 years later, she did something unbelievable with the help of an unlikely ally to get revenge. You will never imagine what she did. Emily sat in the back of the classroom, as always, her eyes glued to the desk in front of her. The sounds of laughter, chattering, and clinking lockers filled the air. But for Emily, it was all background noise. She had learned to tune it out as she did with most of the world. Her thoughts were a constant whirlwind, her heart pounding with the anxiety of knowing that soon, it would be her turn to speak. She wasn't like the other girls in her high school, where they were bold, outspoken, and full of laughter. Emily was reserved, shy. Her voice, when she tried to use it, betrayed her at every turn. A simple question in class, a request to answer a teacher's inquiry, was a terrifying ordeal for her. The words she wanted to say became tangled in her throat, and no matter how hard she tried, they always came out wrong, disjointed, broken, stuttered. It was a disability no one could understand. Her stutter wasn't just a speech issue, it was a prison. Each word felt like an obstacle, each sentence like a mountain to climb. She avoided speaking whenever she could, and when she couldn't, she felt the eyes of her classmates bore into her, waiting for her to fail. And fail she did. The laughter followed her everywhere. It was always the same: snickers, whispered remarks behind her back, and cruel jokes. At first, it was the quiet ones who made fun of her, but soon, it was everyone. Her classmates would mock her stutter, twist her words into something funny. It wasn't even about her anymore. It was about the spectacle of her struggle. And then there was Sarah. Sarah was the embodiment of everything Emily wasn't, or at least, everything she wished she could be. The popular girl, the one who held the social currency of high school, surrounded by a circle of friends who hung on her every word. Sarah was beautiful, confident, and cruel. She had perfected the art of making others feel small while remaining untouchable. And Emily, with her stutter, was an easy target. Sarah's cruelty was relentless. It wasn't just the teasing during class, where Sarah would make sarcastic comments about how long it took Emily to get a simple word out. It was the way Sarah made sure everyone knew that Emily was different, and therefore less. She would mimic Emily's stutter when no one was looking, turning Emily's biggest insecurity into a joke for her own amusement. Sarah didn't just torment Emily with words. She isolated her. In Sarah's eyes, Emily was invisible, just not in the way Emily wanted to be. Yet, amidst all this, there was Jake. Jake wasn't like Sarah. He wasn't part of the popular crowd, nor did he care for the drama that seemed to fuel the high school social hierarchy. He was quiet, reserved, and didn't have the wealth or status to fit in with the elite. His clothes were always a little worn, and his shoes had scuff marks, but there was something genuine about him. Something that made Emily feel like she wasn't completely alone. Jake saw something in Emily that no one else did. Where others saw weakness, he saw strength. A quiet strength that only needed someone to believe in it. He never laughed at her stutter. He never made her feel like she was less because of it. In fact, Jake was often the only one who would sit with Emily during lunch, offering a silent companionship that spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't treat her like a project, didn't try to fix her, but he encouraged her. When Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond in class, Jake was there with a kind word or a supportive smile. He made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for. And it was Jake who would be the one to suggest something Emily had never dared consider. Seeking help not just for her stutter, but for herself. To stop hiding, to stop running from the one thing she had always feared, being seen. But Emily wasn't sure. She hadn't yet realized that the thing that had kept her in the shadows, the very thing she feared, was also the thing that could set her free. Emily's dreams weren't grand. She didn't want to be famous or popular. She didn't want attention or praise. She wanted respect. She wanted to be heard. For so long, she had lived in the background, wondering if anyone would ever see her as more than her stutter, more than the girl who couldn't speak without stumbling. She dreamt of a world where she could speak without fear, where she wasn't defined by a disability, where her voice mattered. But in those early years, it felt like an impossible dream. How could someone like her ever find a place in a world that mocked her at every turn? For Emily, each day felt like an uphill battle, with her stutter defining her existence. She couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. And so, Emily's journey began, not with a dramatic moment of self-realization, but with the quiet, unseen actions of a boy named Jake who believed in her when no one else did. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. The road to change never is. But for the first time, Emily allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The days blurred together for Emily, each one an echo of the last. Lonely, painful, and filled with a heavy silence that no one seemed to hear. But some days were worse than others. Days like today. It happened in history class just like so many other times. Emily had been called upon to answer a question, and her heart had already begun to race. Her fingers, cold and clammy, gripped the edge of her desk as she rose, her breath shallow. The classroom seemed to close in on her. The faces of her classmates, most of whom had already turned their attention elsewhere, now refocused on her. The pressure was unbearable. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The stutter caught her off guard, trapping her in a moment of helplessness. And then came Sarah's voice, sharp, mocking. See, what's the answer, Emily? Sarah mocked, drawing out every syllable in a cruel imitation of Emily's own speech. Laughter erupted around the room. It wasn't just a few snickers, it was loud, invasive, and suffocating. Emily's face flushed red. She could feel the hot sting of shame burning her skin, but it wasn't just her body that felt the heat. It was her soul crushed, humiliated once again in front of her peers. She stammered, tried again, but her throat tightened, and her words were lost. The teacher's voice cut through the noise, but it did little to soothe the pain. The damage had already been done. Sarah's cruel mimicry echoed in Emily's mind, drowning out everything else. The laughter lingered long after the bell rang, following her as she fled to the nearest bathroom, hiding in the shadows, unable to escape the way she felt about herself. But then Jake, who had always been an outsider much like Emily, noticed when she fled into the bathroom after being humiliated, so he waited at the hallway. As soon as Emily came out, tears brimming in her eyes, Jake stepped forward, without hesitation, to offer her a hand. His words, though simple, were a balm to her raw, battered heart. "Hey, don't let them get to you," Jake had said, his voice steady and genuine. "People like her, they don't know anything about you. You're better than that." Emily hadn't known what to say, but in that moment, Jake's words didn't feel empty. They felt like truth. Slowly, tentatively, she began to trust him. Over time, their bond grew. Jake, despite his own struggles, growing up in a cramped apartment with his mother who was bedridden and sick, unable to afford the treatments she desperately needed, never failed to offer Emily kindness and understanding. As the weeks passed, Jake noticed something in Emily's eyes, a flicker of hope. She wasn't sure what to do with it, but it was there. One day, he asked her something that surprised her. "Have you ever thought about getting help? For your stutter?" Emily had hesitated, but the thought of speaking without fear, of not stumbling over every word, was almost too much to imagine. The therapy, the treatment, it all felt so far out of reach, a dream that people like her couldn't afford. Yet, Jake's persistence was unwavering. He wasn't rich, but he would give anything to see Emily find her voice. He offered to help her find a local speech therapist, even though he barely had enough money to pay for his mother's prescriptions. "We'll figure it out together," Jake said, his smile small but full of promise. The first session was harder than Emily could have ever imagined. She could barely speak without choking on the words. The therapist was kind, patient, but it didn't matter. Every time Emily tried to make progress, the memory of Sarah's taunts would rush back to her, clouding her focus. But with Jake's encouragement, Emily kept going. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could improve. But Sarah wasn't done. As Emily's progress became evident, Sarah's cruelty intensified. Emily was no longer the quiet, broken girl in the back of the class. Her voice was getting stronger, more confident with each session. Sarah saw it as a challenge, something to mock and tear down. One day, during lunch, Sarah approached Emily, her tone dripping with venom. "You think you're better now?" Sarah sneered. "You think you can speak without sounding like a joke? You're still the same. You'll never be one of us." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that with time, the bullying would stop, that maybe Sarah would leave her alone. But as Sarah's words echoed through the lunchroom, Emily realized that Sarah's need to belittle her had only grown stronger. The louder Emily's voice became, the more desperate Sarah seemed to prove that Emily was still inferior. Jake saw the change in Emily. He knew the road ahead would be long and painful. The support he gave her wasn't just about words, it was about sacrifice. There were days when he skipped lunch so that Emily could afford the therapy sessions. Days when he worked extra hours at his part-time job, not for himself, but to help cover Emily's costs. And yet, despite everything, he never complained. His kindness wasn't born out of pity, it was born out of a shared understanding of struggle. They were both fighting, in their own ways, for something better. But Emily wasn't the only one fighting. Jake had his own battles, invisible to most. His mother's health continued to deteriorate, and every time he looked at her, he felt the crushing weight of knowing he couldn't do enough. But seeing Emily's determination, seeing the way her spirit slowly began to shift, gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to keep pushing forward. But with each step forward, there was always a shadow waiting to pull Emily back. Sarah was relentless. She couldn't stand the thought of Emily breaking free from the chains of ridicule. And so, she turned her cruelty into a daily ritual. Every word Emily spoke, every laugh she earned, was met with a cold stare and a biting comment. Sarah's fear of being overshadowed by Emily's transformation turned her jealousy into a dangerous obsession. And Emily knew, deep down, that her fight wasn't just for herself anymore. It was for Jake. It was for every person who had ever been silenced, every soul who had been made to feel small. She wasn't just learning to speak, she was learning to stand tall. It had been months since Emily first began the grueling process of speech therapy, and the progress, though slow, was undeniable. The road to improvement had been paved with self-doubt and the constant battle against the crushing weight of embarrassment. But now there was something different in the way Emily spoke. Something stronger, more sure. She could feel it in the rhythm of her words, the confidence in her breath. For the first time in her life, her voice no longer felt like a burden. Today was going to be the test. Today, Emily had been asked to give a presentation in front of her class, a task that would have terrified her months ago. But not anymore. She stood at the front of the room, her hands gripping the edges of the podium, her heart racing, but her voice steady. As she began, there was a moment of stillness. The room was silent. The faces around her were a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They hadn't seen this side of Emily before. They didn't know the struggle she had faced to stand here, delivering these words without the fear that had once held her hostage. But just as Emily found her rhythm, just as she felt the words flow from her with the ease she had always dreamed of, the unmistakable sound of laughter broke through the air. "Sarah. It was always Sarah. CCC, can you handle this?" Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and deliberate, her laughter cutting through Emily's words. She had attempted to undermine her, just as she always had. It was cruel, it was deliberate, and it was meant to break Emily's confidence. The room tensed. Emily's heart sank, the familiar sting of humiliation threatening to choke her. But then something inside her shifted. This time, she wasn't going to let Sarah win. Not today. With a deep breath, Emily continued, louder this time, stronger. Her voice wavered only briefly, but she steadied herself, pushing forward with every ounce of strength she had. She finished the presentation, and when she did, the silence that followed wasn't filled with laughter. It was filled with something else, respect. For a moment, Emily dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment everything would change. But the universe had more lessons in store for Sarah, and for Emily, too. The next day, Emily's presentation was still the talk of the school. The hallway she usually felt invisible now became a place of praises, everyone seeing her as though she was now famous. But it wasn't the success of her speech that grabbed everyone's attention. It was the video. Someone from the back of the room, had filmed Sarah's taunting and posted it online. Within hours, the video went viral. It was everywhere, on social media, in the school hallways, even on the local news. It was Sarah's cruel behavior, her bullying of Emily, out in the open for the world to see. And now, it was Sarah who was being humiliated. The backlash was swift and unforgiving. School authorities launched an investigation and immediately informed her parents, who became highly disappointed. Alongside, she was publicly suspended from all positions she held in school. Peers who had once adored Sarah now saw her for what she truly was and started hating on her for being so cruel. The popularity she had once enjoyed crumbled beneath the weight of her actions. The social circles that had once revolved around her now turned their backs. She was alone. For Emily, the feeling of victory was bittersweet. She had watched Sarah get what she deserved, but part of her, a part she wasn't proud of, felt a twinge of satisfaction. Sarah had finally learned the cost of cruelty. But just as the world seemed to be aligning in her favor, Emily was faced with an unexpected crossroads. It was Jake, the boy who had always been there for her, the one person who believed in her when no one else did. He had been her rock, the one who encouraged her to keep pushing through the pain, to never give up. Now was the one who needed help. Jake's world was falling apart. His mother's health was deteriorating. The once vibrant woman who had raised him was bedridden, now barely able to speak, struggling to hold on to life. Jake, who had sacrificed so much to help Emily, was now the one who needed her. Emily could feel the weight of the decision before her, and it was a burden she wasn't prepared for. She had worked so hard to get this far, to find her voice, to reclaim the confidence she had lost so many years ago. But now, she had to choose between continuing with her own growth and helping the person who had given her the strength to get this far. But the truth is, Jake needed her. His mother needed her. And for the first time, as Emily stood on the edge of her own transformation, she understood something deeper. Life wasn't just about moving forward at all costs. Sometimes, it was about knowing when to pause and look back to help those who had helped you. The question was no longer about whether Emily could speak, but about who she could become once she finally found her voice. The day Emily had been working toward for months had finally arrived. With help from the school authorities, Emily had organized a school assembly to address bullying, sharing her story of humiliation and resilience. Today, she was going to speak in front of the entire school. Not just to give a presentation, but to share something far deeper, far more personal. Today, Emily was going to confront the very thing that had held her captive for so long, bullying. And she was going to do it with the power of her voice, the one she had fought so hard to reclaim. She stood backstage, heart pounding in her chest, her palms clammy against the smooth fabric of her blouse. The assembly hall buzzed with the sound of students settling into their seats, chattering, laughing, oblivious to the gravity of what was about to unfold. Sarah, too, terrified of what Emily might say about her on stage, covered her face in shame as she headed to her seat. But Emily wasn't thinking about the noise, nor even Sarah. She wasn't thinking about the hundreds of eyes that would be on her in just a few moments. But she was thinking about every single day she had spent in those very hallways, hiding from the whispers, the laughter, the mocking. Every single moment she had spent being humiliated, feeling small, feeling invisible. The lights dimmed, and the crowd quieted. The principal stood at the podium, introducing the assembly, but Emily barely heard his words. She was lost in the weight of the moment. Then it was time. Her name was called. She stepped forward, her legs unsteady at first, but with each step, she felt her strength building. This was her moment. She was no longer the quiet girl in the back of the classroom. She wasn't the girl hiding in the shadows anymore. As she walked to the front of the stage, she could feel the eyes of the school on her. Those same eyes that had once laughed, that had once turned away when she needed help. She could see Sarah in the front row, her arms crossed, a look of indifference on her face. But Emily didn't flinch. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't there to get revenge. She was there to speak the truth. The microphone crackled as Emily took it in her hand, her voice barely above a whisper at first, but growing with each passing second. "I've spent so much of my life in silence," she began, her words flowing with a confidence that came from a place deep inside of her, one that had been buried for far too long. "I spent years thinking that my voice didn't matter. I believed the things people said about me, that I was weak, that I would never be good enough, that my stutter defined who I was." She paused, taking a deep breath, the silence in the room pressing in on her. Emily could feel every eye on her, but this time it didn't scare her. It empowered her. "But today, I stand here because I've learned something. I've learned that our struggles don't define us. What matters is how we rise, how we use our pain to lift others up. I stand here today to tell anyone who has ever felt the way I've felt, that you are not alone. You are worth more than the hurtful words of others. You are strong, and you can find your voice, just like I did." As Emily spoke, she could feel the energy in the room shift. The students who had once mocked her now sat in rapt attention. And then, she turned to Sarah. "There's something I need to say," Emily continued, her gaze locking onto Sarah's. "I know what it's like to be hurt. I know what it's like to be humiliated, to be made to feel small. But I also know that we have the power to change. I've forgiven you for what you've done to me, and I hope, one day, you can forgive yourself too." A stunned silence fell over the room. Sarah sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock, guilt, and something Emily couldn't quite place. But there it was, Sarah's own realization that the world she had once controlled with her cruelty was now slipping away. The crowd murmured, unsure of how to respond, but Emily didn't look away. She stood tall, every inch of her filled with the power she had spent years searching for. She had faced her bully, not with anger, but with the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are. And then, in a moment that no one expected, Emily did something that stunned everyone in the room. She stepped toward Sarah. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call her out. She didn't demand an apology. Instead, she extended her hand toward Sarah, offering not revenge, not justice, but forgiveness. "I know it's not easy," Emily said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But we all deserve a second chance. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to show you that we can all change. And we can start by forgiving one another." For a long moment, Sarah didn't move. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, Sarah reached out and took Emily's hand. The crowd was silent, watching as the girl who had once tormented Emily now stood before her, accepting the very forgiveness that had eluded her for so long. In that moment, something shifted, not just between Emily and Sarah, but in the entire room. The students, the teachers, the staff, they all saw it. Strength isn't about holding on to anger. It isn't about letting the past define you. It's about lifting others up, even when they've hurt you. It's about having the courage to choose kindness over hatred. As Emily stood there, hand in hand with the girl who had once made her life a living nightmare, she realized that this was the true meaning of strength. But do you think Emily did the right thing? What would you have done if you were in Emily's position? Would you offer forgiveness and be the better person? Or would you rather pay back revenge with your newfound power? This is a choice we all will face at some point in our lives, and it's up to us to define the outcome through our actions. The dust had finally settled, and Emily's life, once overshadowed by the pain of rejection and humiliation, had blossomed into something unrecognizable, something powerful. Her story, the one she had once kept locked deep inside, had now become a beacon of hope for countless others who had faced similar struggles. Her advocacy work, born out of her own painful journey, began to grow in ways she hadn't imagined. Emily's voice, once a source of shame, was now the heart of her mission. She spoke at schools, community centers, and events, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. Her words carried the weight of 1,000 untold experiences, and they resonated deeply with those who had been silenced or ignored because of their own struggles. She created a foundation dedicated to helping people with speech disorders and disabilities, providing resources and support for those who, like her, had been made to feel small. People came to her for guidance, and she offered them not just help, but hope, proof that they could find their voice just as she had. But it wasn't just the people she helped who had been transformed. Jake, the boy who had stood by her through every hardship, had become a part of her work in ways both big and small. Emily knew that without his support, none of this would have been possible. But even as all these transformations were happening for Emily, one afternoon the hospital called Jake. It was his mother. Her condition had become critical. He needed to pay for her surgery, but he still didn't have the money for it. Jake broke down in tears because he knew he could lose her if he didn't act fast. As soon as Emily heard this, she didn't hesitate for a second. She organized a fundraiser, pulling together everything she had learned about reaching out, about gathering people together for a cause that mattered. The event was a success beyond anyone's expectations, and Jake's mother received the treatment she so desperately needed. After everything, Emily felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had given back to the boy who had never turned away from her, the boy whose kindness had helped her rediscover her own strength. And then there was Sarah. It was a quiet afternoon when Emily received the message. She hadn't expected it, hadn't even thought about Sarah in months. Not since the assembly. The girl who had once made Emily's life a living nightmare now stood at a crossroads of her own, having faced the consequences of her actions. Sarah had watched as her social standing had crumbled. The viral video had shown her in a light she could never escape, and the harsh reality of what she had done to Emily had caught up with her. But in that moment, when Sarah reached out, it wasn't an apology that mattered most. It was the realization that change was possible. Sarah was reaching out, not as the bully who once tormented Emily, but as a person who understood the damage she had caused. She asked for forgiveness. Emily, knowing the weight of carrying that kind of pain, chose not to turn away. Instead, she offered Sarah a chance to make things right. Sarah began volunteering at Emily's organization. It wasn't easy, and the others in the room watched with mixed emotions as she joined the team. But Emily never wavered. She knew the power of second chances, of redemption. She believed that, just as she had found healing in her own journey, others, like Sarah, deserved the same opportunity. Again, do you think Emily made the right decision by accepting Sarah to join her team after all she did to her in the past? Would you rather keep your distance from such a person after forgiving them? Or would you go ahead to offer a helping hand to them when they need you? In the weeks that followed, Emily continued her work, her reach expanding, her message growing louder and more powerful. For Emily, her stutter was no longer a weakness. It had become the foundation of a voice that could heal and inspire. She had turned her pain into power, and in doing so, had shown the world that the greatest strength wasn't in holding on to the past, but in finding the courage to move forward and lift others up along the way. The auditorium was packed, the room humming with anticipation. People from all walks of life had gathered to hear her speak. People who had followed her journey, who had been touched by her story. Emily stood at the podium, a woman transformed. She was no longer the timid, stuttering girl who had once been invisible. She was a force, a voice that commanded attention, not through loud words, but through the weight of the truth she carried. Today, she wasn't just sharing her own story. She was standing before an audience of thousands, speaking on behalf of everyone who had ever felt silenced, misunderstood, or rejected. As she looked out at the crowd, she didn't just see faces. She saw the faces of all the people she had helped, all the people who had found strength in her words, in her journey. She saw the faces of those who, like her, had faced rejection and found their way back to hope. It's easy to forget. Emily's voice echoed across the room, steady and sure. How one small act of kindness can change everything. We live in a world that too often values perfection over humanity. But I stand before you today to tell you that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that patience is more powerful than judgment, and that compassion has the ability to heal even the deepest wounds. Her eyes swept over the audience, the energy in the room palpable as they hung on her every word. My journey wasn't easy. It was long, painful, and full of setbacks. But it was one small act of kindness that changed everything. It came from someone I least expected. It came from Jake, a boy who saw me, truly saw me, even when I couldn't see myself. He didn't judge me for my stutter. He didn't pity me. He simply offered me friendship, something I hadn't known I needed. And it was that simple act of kindness that changed the course of my life. The room was silent, as if every single person in that space could feel the weight of Emily's words, the power of what they represented. If I've learned anything, she continued, it's that no one should ever have to fight alone. And we all have the power to change someone's life, to lift them up when they feel broken, to stand with them when they're too tired to stand on their own. It doesn't take much, just one small gesture, one moment of empathy, one decision to choose compassion over cruelty. As Emily spoke, her mind drifted back to the beginning, back to those high school days when every day felt like a battle. She thought about the girl who had made her life a nightmare, about Sarah, who had once mocked her. And now, Sarah sat in the audience, her eyes filled with remorse. It had taken time, but Sarah had changed. She had come to realize the cost of her cruelty. And Emily, in an act of forgiveness that surprised even her, had opened the door for Sarah to change, too. We're all on this journey together, Emily said, her voice softening. And we all make mistakes. The question isn't whether we'll mess up. It's what we do once we realize we've hurt someone. Are we strong enough to own our mistakes? Are we brave enough to change? I choose to believe that we can all choose to do better. And if we do, if we really choose to see each other, to help each other, we can transform the world around us, one act of kindness at a time. The room erupted in applause, but Emily stood still, her heart full. As she looked out, she saw Jake in the front row, his face filled with pride, and Sarah beside him, her eyes soft with gratitude. The three of them had come a long way from where they had started. For Emily, the journey was far from over. She had found her voice, yes, but more than that, she had found a purpose. She had found a reason to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep speaking, because there were still so many who needed to hear her story. Still so many who needed to be reminded that they were not alone. And as she stood there, surrounded by the people who had supported her, she asked herself the question that had driven her from the very beginning. What if we chose compassion over cruelty? How many lives could we transform? And with that, Emily's journey continued, not just as a survivor of her own past, but as someone who had become a beacon of light for others. Now, we want to hear from you. How would you react if you were in Emily's shoes? Or perhaps if you had been Sarah? What choices would you make? And how could one small act of compassion change someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your reflections and continue this conversation. If this story resonated with you, if it touched something deep inside, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful tale like this. Stories that remind us of the incredible impact we can have when we choose empathy over indifference. Thank you for watching Soulful Twists. Until next time, remember, every act of kindness has the potential to change someone's world.